We're often drawn into these kinds of mysteries, aren't we? Unsolved disappearances, particularly when they end tragically.
Absolutely. They capture the public imagination.
And today, we're diving into one that's, well, particularly compelling and controversial. The Smiley Face murder theory.
Right. This one's definitely sparked a lot of discussion.
It's not just a few isolated incidents. It's a huge claim, really, that challenges the official story on dozens of deaths.
Dozens, yeah.
So we'll be digging into the details, looking at the claims, the counter-arguments. We have a source guiding us here. And our goal really is to help you, the listener, get a handle on the core parts of this whole mystery. Okay, let's unpack this.
Sounds good. Where do we start?
Let's start with who's behind the theory. There are three main figures. Two retired NYPD detectives, Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte.
Okay.
And also Dr. Lee Gilbertson. He's a criminal justice professor, a gang expert too, from St. Cloud State University.
Got it. So, experienced investigators and an academic.
Exactly. And their central idea is pretty shocking. They allege that 45 young men found in water across several Midwestern states, late 90s to the 2010s. They say these weren't accidental drownings, which is what the police concluded.
Right, that's the official line for most of them.
But Gannon, Duarte, and Gilbertson, they argue these men were actually victims, murdered by maybe one serial killer, maybe more.
Wow. Okay, so that completely changes the narrative on these cases.
Completely. And what's really fascinating is the name itself, the smiley face part.
Yeah, where does that come from? It's such a distinct name.
Well, according to Gannon and Duarte, it came about because they found graffiti, specifically a smiley face, near where they believe the bodies were dumped.
Pumped, not just where they were found.
Right. Their theory involves the bodies being placed there. And they claim this smiley face graffiti was present in at least a dozen cases.
A dozen, okay. But not all 45.
Not all, apparently. And it gets a bit more complex because Gannon and Gilbertson also mention finding other symbols, other types of graffiti.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, that's the thing. They haven't disclosed those publicly.
Keeping it under wraps. Why?
Their reasoning is partly to avoid copycats, and also not to tip off any potential suspects if the theory is correct.
It makes sense from an investigative standpoint, I suppose, if you believe you're onto something active.
And they also point to a victim profile, which they feel is quite specific.
What kind of profile are we talking about?
Often college-age men, popular, athletic, doing well in school, mostly white.
Okay.
And typically they disappeared after being out, maybe at parties or bars, and they've been drinking.
Right, which is often a factor in accidental drownings too, isn't it?
It is, and that's part of the contention. But the proponents argue this specific combination of factors points away from accidents and towards, well, something sinister. Gannon actually wrote a textbook case study about it too, Case Studies in Drowning Forensics.
So he's really invested in this academically as well.
Seems so. But given these really strong claims, we absolutely have to look at the other side. What's the official pushback?
And there is significant pushback.
Yeah. So how have law enforcement agencies reacted?
Overwhelmingly with skepticism, basically. Other police forces looking into these same deaths, they strongly dispute the idea that they're linked.
They just don't see it as serial killer activity.
Nope. Take La Crosse, Wisconsin, for instance. They handled 8 of these investigations.
8 of the 45, okay.
Yeah, and their conclusion was pretty clear. Accidental drownings involving young men who are intoxicated.
And the smiley face.
They stated very clearly, no smiley face symbols were found connected to any of their cases. 0.
That's a direct contradiction to the theory's core claim, at least for those cases.
It is, and beyond individual departments, you have organizations like the Center for Homicide Research. They actually published a brief trying to scientifically refute the theory.
So not just disagreeing, but actively trying to debunk it using research.
Exactly. It's a pretty clear signal from the scientific community, or at least parts of it, pushing back against this popular theory.
Right, because it did become quite popular, didn't it?
Oh, definitely.
And it's not just agencies, you mentioned experts. What about individuals?
Well, a prominent voice against it is the criminal profiler Pat Brown.
Okay, what's her take?
She's called the whole serial killer idea ludicrous. Pretty blunt.
Ludicrous. Why?
Her argument is basically that the evidence, what little there is presented publicly, just doesn't fit known serial killer patterns or behaviors.
Okay, and the smiley faces. What did she make of those?
She thinks they're likely just coincidence. Smiley faces are incredibly common symbols, graffiti tags.
Right, you see them everywhere.
Exactly. She famously said something like, if you look in any area 5 miles square, I bet you could find a smiley face.
It's like looking for shapes in clouds, maybe.
Yeah.
You find what you're looking for.
That seems to be her implication. But Gannon and Gilbertson actually have a counter to that specific point.
Oh, what do they say?
They claim they did actually do that kind of search, looked at lots of areas across the country, some linked to these deaths, some not. And they say they rarely found smiley faces in the unrelated areas. They argue their findings suggest it's not just a common symbol appearing randomly in these specific spots.
So they're sticking to the idea that it's a pattern, not just background noise.
Correct. They dispute that coincidence argument directly.
Okay, so we have local police, researchers, profilers. What about the big guns? The FBI?
Yes. The FBI did weigh in. They issued an official statement back in April 2008.
And what was their conclusion?
Pretty definitive. They said, and I'm paraphrasing slightly here, to date, we haven't developed any evidence to support links between these deaths, or to back up the theory they're the work of a serial killer or killers.
No evidence of links. No evidence of killers.
None. And they added, the vast majority of these instances appear to be alcohol-related drownings.
Wow. That's about as clear a refutation as you can get from a major federal agency.
It really is. And, this kind of official denial raises questions about how these theories persist.
Yeah, and about the people pushing them. Have their motives been questioned?
They have. Ruben Rosario, a journalist with the St. Paul Pioneer Press, he specifically questioned Gannon, basically saying he hadn't provided actual facts to back up the claim of a killer group.
Yeah, asking for the proof.
Right. And interestingly, Christy Peel, she was the original reporter who broke the story on the theory. Well, she and even some of the parents of the young men later expressed some skepticism themselves, despite maybe initially being drawn to the idea.
So some who were close to it have had second thoughts.
Some have, yes, but it's not universal. Other parents, like Kathy Geib, are still actively pushing police to re-examine these kinds of drownings, believing there's more to it.
So the conviction remains strong for some families.
Yeah.
Understandably, they want answers.
Absolutely. And that personal conviction, mixed with media attention, really shapes how these cases are perceived by the public, even against official findings.
Yeah, it's really striking how, despite all this official skepticism and refutation, the theory itself has just stuck around, especially in pop culture.
It really has lodged itself in the public consciousness.
Keeps the idea alive, doesn't it? You see it referenced in shows and things.
Definitely. Gives it kind of cultural validation, almost.
Like, there's that docuseries in 2019, Smiley Face Killers, The Hunt for Justice on Oxygen.
Right, I remember that. Brought Gannon and the team's work back into the spotlight.
And even across the pond, the British detective show Scott and Bailey apparently did a storyline based on it.
Interesting. Shows its reach.
Then there's fiction, too. A 2017 novel, Ill Will, by Dan Chaon, touches on similar themes. Drunk young white men found dead in water. And a movie in 2020, literally called Smiley Face Killers, loosely inspired by the theory.
It's kind of fascinating how these things take on a life of their own, isn't it? Especially when they tap into those deep-seated fears about, the unknown or hidden dangers.
Totally.
Yeah.
And people sometimes connect these cases to other disappearances too, right? Like Brian Schaffer or Brandon Swanson.
Yeah, those names come up often in these discussions because of the surface similarities, young men vanishing after nights out. Or even that Manchester pusher theory in the UK.
Right, another alleged killer linked to canal deaths.
Exactly. Now, we're not saying these are linked, just that they get discussed together in this broader context of mysterious drownings and the anxieties around them.
It just shows how these narratives can connect and grow. So thinking about all this, what does it all mean for you, the listener?
Where does it leave us?
Well, what we've laid out today really highlights this core tension, doesn't it? You have this compelling, very detailed theory from former detectives.
Backed by their experience.
But then you have this stark contrast with the official conclusions from law enforcement, from the FBI, and the refutations from scientific experts.
Yeah, it's a real clash, and this deep dive, I think, really underscores that challenge of separating theory from confirmed fact. especially when you're dealing with such tragic events.
And deeply held beliefs on both sides.
Exactly. It really hammers home how important critical thinking is, especially now, with so much information and so many competing stories out there.
Makes you think about our own desire for answers, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Our need for narrative.
Yeah, that innate human thing. Sometimes a scary explanation, if it provides structure, feels, well, maybe more manageable than just random tragedy.
Than chaos or uncertainty.
Right. A structured evil versus just bad luck or terrible accident.
Exactly. So maybe the final thought for you to ponder is this. When does a theory, even one that's been officially refuted, keep holding on? Why does it maintain that power? And what does that persistence tell us about our own need, maybe, to find patterns and explanations? Especially when faced with things that are truly uncertain or frightening.
That's a heavy question.
It is, but worth thinking about. We encourage you to take all these details we've discussed, consider the source material, and, form your own informed view on this really perplexing mystery.